Now, एंशियंट इंडिया, अर्ली मेडिवल इंडिया लगभग हमारा खत्म हो चुका है. A few miscellaneous topics are remaining, such as Kalhana's Rajatarangini. Right? Now, यहाँ से अगर यूपीएससी क्वेश्चन पूछता है तो किस तरह का सवाल पूछेगा? Is it going to ask us about the contents of Kalhana's Rajatarangini? यहाँ से क्वेश्चन आएगा? नहीं. Rather, the question is going to be regarding the significance of the Rajatarangini as a source of history, its quality as a historical work, and whether it was a true work of history or not. ठीक है, तो क्वेश्चन यहाँ से प्रोबेबल है. पहले भी यूपीएससी सवाल पूछ चुका है, वो यहीं से आया है कि सिग्निफिकेंस एज अ सोर्स ऑफ हिस्ट्री एंड वेदर द राजतरंगिनी शुड बी कंसिडर्ड एज अ ट्रू साइंटिफिक वर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री. नाउ बिफोर वी डिस्कस वेदर the Rajatarangini was a true and scientific work of history, first of all, let us define the parameters of a scientific work of history. क्या पैरामीटर्स अप्लाई होंगे यहाँ पर? जो मॉडर्न डिसिप्लिन ऑफ हिस्ट्री है उसको डिफाइन करने के लिए जो पैरामीटर्स हैं सेट बाय द मॉडर्न यूरोपियन स्कॉलर्स, दोज आर द वंस व्हिच आर applied, or those are the parameters which are used to define a scientific work of history. ठीक है, so it is the modern यूरोपियन स्टैंडर्ड, एंड इस मॉडर्न यूरोपियन स्टैंडर्ड को हम टेंजेंशियली एड्रेस कर चुके हैं व्हेन वी वर टॉकिंग अबाउट वेदर इंडियंस हैड, एंशिएंट इंडियंस हैड अ सेंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री और नॉट. राइट, तो अब बताइए कि अकॉर्डिंग टू दिस मॉडर्न यूरोपियन स्टैंडर्ड व्हाट आर द क्वालिटीज दैट एवरी वर्क शुड हैव टू क्वालिफाई एज अ ट्रू वर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री. क्या क्या होना चाहिए? ठीक है, एक तो इट शुड बी एम्पेरिकल. ठीक है, दैट मीन्स ये मनगढ़ंत नहीं होना चाहिए. इट शुड नॉट बी रिटन इन वैक्यूम, रादर the work should rely upon several sources, citing these sources very clearly. ठीक है, so there should be a clear reliance on historical sources, and the greater the number of sources cited, the more reliable and scientific the work is considered to be. ठीक है, greater the number of sources, greater the reliability. कोई और क्वालिटी है ट्रू साइंटिफिक वर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री की? और कुछ? it should be a chronological assessment of facts and incidents. अब इस chronological assessment में क्या क्या चीजें जरूरी हैं? First of all, a clear understanding and perception of time periods should be there. और हम पास्ट की चीजों को कैसे कैरेक्टराइज करते हैं, कैसे परसीव करते हैं, या फिर कैसे उनको पिन पॉइंट करते हैं? थ्रू यूज ऑफ वेरियस कैलेंडर्स, राइट? So specific dates must be given first of all. Secondly, it is not simply a chronological study of the past but a chronological assessment of the past. उसके लिए क्या जरूरी है? That a causal link must be established between different incidents, different developments. ठीक है, वैक्यूम में नहीं होना चाहिए. कोई और क्वालिटी है ट्रू साइंटिफिक वर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री का? It should be the result of the critical application of the historian's mind. It should be a critical work, and this critical outlook has to be applied at all stages of writing, of creating this work, while studying the sources, while interpreting the motivations behind the various developments or motivations of various individuals behind their decisions, their actions. Critical interpretation of individual decisions, and also a critical approach while analyzing both of these. To come to various conclusions. ठीक है, तो a true work of history is also the result of critical analysis. Sources को face value पे नहीं ले लेना चाहिए. Their merits and demerits should be evaluated carefully. They should be weighed. The mistakes of previous historians or the misleading facts written in previous works of history, they must be eliminated to arrive at the core essence of the truth. Only those parcels of the version that has been supplied by previous historians should be considered, which are वेरीफाइबल. ऐसे नहीं कुछ भी लिखा हुआ है तो उसको लेके आप अपने हिस्ट्री बुक में लिख दोगे. क्रिटिकल इंटरप्रिटेशन ऑफ इंडिविजुअल डिसीजंस इज आल्सो इक्वली इंपॉर्टेंट, कि अलग अलग पर्सनालिटीज ने क्या डिसीजंस लिए उसको क्रिटिकली अप्रिशिएट करना चाहिए, राइट? व्हाट वर द अपॉर्चुनिटीज इन फ्रंट ऑफ देम, व्हाट वर द चैलेंजेस दैट दे नीडेड टू ओवरकम, व्हाट वर द रिस्क दैट दे नीडेड टू नेविगेट, what was the opposition that they were facing, what were the pressures that they were feeling. All of these must be weighed carefully while coming to any interpretation. And similarly, a critical approach must be applied for coming to conclusions, right? So on the basis of both of these, यहाँ पे भी जो end result होगा वो भी critical analysis का ही result होगा, right? तो ये एक तो एम्पिरिकल वर्क्स होते हैं, क्रोनोलॉजिकल असेसमेंट पे बेस्ड होते हैं, क्रिटिकल वर्क्स होते हैं, ऑल ट्रू वर्क्स ऑफ हिस्ट्री. व्हाट एल्स? और क्या? What should be the subject matter? History plus something else or only history? Only history. ठीक है. तो to qualify as a true work of history, it should be a pure work of history. It should not be a religious or literary work. And why is this? Because history is a rational field of study, whereas religion and literature are by definition irrational. ठीक है. So they should be purely rational and fact based. ठीक है. Anything else? और कुछ? While the historian is supposed to give his own understanding of the past, should it be colored or unbiased understanding? Unbiased works होने चाहिए. Wherein the historian must account not only for his own bias but also the biases of previous authors, previous scholars. ठीक है. Anything else? What is the purpose of history writing or what is the end goal of history writing? A good work of history should have the power to transport the reader into the age which is being discussed so that the reader can appreciate the developments almost like an eyewitness. ठीक है. So a good work of history almost acts like a time machine for the reader. It should transport the reader into the past. With what objective? To learn valuable lessons from the past. ठीक है. Anything else that a good work of history must possess? और कुछ होना चाहिए to qualify as a scientific वर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री कोई और क्वालिटी होनी चाहिए? ठीक है, तो वही ना, बायस नहीं होना चाहिए, सेक्युलर होना चाहिए, अनबायस्ड होना चाहिए, इम्पार्शियल होना चाहिए। कुछ और? एनीथिंग एल्स? Should a true work of history concentrate upon the actions and activities of only a small section of the population, or should it be concerned with the impact of historical change on a broad cross section of the population? ब्रॉड क्रॉस सेक्शन, तो माइक्रोस्कोपिक स्टडी नहीं होना चाहिए, ब्रॉड बेस्ड होना चाहिए अपने स्कोप में. इट शुड हैव अ ब्रॉड scope wherein historical change must be analyzed from the perspective of different classes ठीक है. Now, should a true work of history exist in vacuum, or should it be aware of existing literary traditions and also the histories of neighboring regions and cultures? वैक्यूम में होना चाहिए या कंपैरेटिव होना चाहिए? कंपैरेटिव होना चाहिए. So, true work of history should have awareness of parallel traditions, histories, and cultures as well. In fact, it should be able to identify the linkages and differences between these streams. Right? So, these are some of those qualities which, if possessed by a work of history according to the modern European standards, can be considered as a true and scientific work of history. Now, the Rajatarangini of Kalhana, which is a work of Kashmiri history from the mythical times right up to the mid-12th century AD, revolving around the history of which region? Kashmir, is considered or has been considered right from the colonial period up to the modern period as India's first and only scientific work or true work ऑफ हिस्ट्री। ठीक है, तो और इसमें देयर इज अ रिमार्केबल डिग्री ऑफ हिस्टोरिकल कंसेंसस ऑल्सो। कॉलोनियल स्कॉलर्स ने भी इसको एज ए ट्रू वर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री कंसिडर किया है, नेशनलिस्ट्स ने भी, एंड मार्क्सिस्ट ने भी। कॉलोनियल स्कॉलर्स में एक दो के नाम आप लिख सकते हो, H विल्सन, नेशनलिस्ट्स में RC मजूमदार, एंड मार्क्सिस्ट में रोमिला थापर। राइट, एंड दिस ब्रॉड कंसेंसस, what does it tell you about the nature of Rajatarangini? That it had, if not all, at least many of these qualities of a true work of history, of a scientific work of history. It was based upon empirical study. Kalhana relied upon as many as 11 previous Sanskrit works, Sanskrit chronicles, including the works of Shemendra, Banbhat, Suvrat, etc. Along with that, he also made a study of existing inscriptions. He even made a study of donative royal inscriptions, making on confirming land grants. He also studied ancient coins before he came to his conclusions. ठीक है, so since he relied upon all these works of history, would it be correct to say that the Rajatarangini is an empirical source of history? सोर्स बेस्ड एविडेंस बेस्ड हिस्ट्री है या फिर ऐसे ही वैक्यूम में मनगढ़ंत कुछ भी लिख दिया है? सोर्स बेस्ड, एविडेंस बेस्ड। कश्मीर के ही कॉइन्स स्टडी किए हैं, बट ही हैज आल्सो स्टडीड सम, और ही आल्सो टॉक्स अबाउट सम कॉइन्स बिलोंगिंग टू द पीरियड ऑफ कनिष्क। ठीक है, तो दैट इज आल्सो देयर। In fact, he talks about not only the rulers of Kashmir, the regional rulers of Kashmir, but also other rulers who at different points in ancient Indian history exercised their political control over Kashmir, including both Ashok as well as Kanishk। ठीक है, तो दोनों के बारे में बात करते हैं। क्रोनोलॉजिकल असेसमेंट देता है, नहीं देता है? देता है। The Rajatarangini is divided into how many books? 8 books, dated from the Mahabharat war, that is the beginning of the Kali Yuga, right up to the 22nd year of the reign of the reigning monarch during his time, whose name was Jayasimha। Now in terms of years, 1148-49 में ये लिखा गया। ठीक है, कंप्लीट किया गया ऑफ जयसिम्हा। He also talks about, or he also mentions the use of several ancient calendars, including the Shak Samvat and Vikram Samvat. Okay? He has talked about the different dynasties who ruled over Kashmir. How many dynasties? कई सारी dynasties. Example दी Gondana dynasty, Aditya dynasty, Gondana II, revival of the Gondana dynasty. Yaskar dynasty, Lohar dynasty, etc. Right? And he gives a chronological account of all these dynasties and the different kings within these dynasties. तो हर एक रूलर के रेन में जो जो इम्पोर्टेंट चीजें हुई उसका इसने एक chronological account दिया हुआ है. He has not simply written down various landmarks of history, but he has also established causal linkages between them. So for each and every ruler, he began by talking about their character, what were their motivations, who were the notable courtiers at their court, what was the degree of influence that these courtiers applied on the minister, applied on the ruler, and how did the ruler respond, what were the problems that these rulers faced, the foreign expeditions, foreign invasions, or maybe some natural calamities, or was it a period of prosperity and peace, and what were the positive developments that took place. सबके बारे में ये बात करता है. ठीक है. अच्छा, तो it is a chronological assessment. Is it a critical work? Yes. Now the Rajatarangini begins with a very lengthy prologue. तो बड़ा सा प्रीफेस लिखा हुआ है उसमें, और उसमें एक ट्रू हिस्टोरियन की क्वालिटीज को कल्हाना ने बहुत क्लियरली मेंशन किया है. राइट? वेयर ही सेज दैट अ हिस्टोरियन शुड बी लाइक अ जज, कंप्लीटली अनबायस्ड, डिटैच्ड फ्रॉम द डेवलपमेंट्स दैट आर हैपनिंग. ही हैज टू हैव एन इम्पार्शियल एटीट्यूड. ही should also rely upon various sources. जैसे एक जज अलग अलग विटनेसेस के एविडेंस को सुनता है और उसके बेसिस पर अपना जजमेंट देता है, ऐसे ही एक हिस्टोरियन को भी अपना जो फील्ड है उसको ट्रीट करना चाहिए. He should consult, he should rely not only on a singular source but on several sources, and उन sources को भी face value पे नहीं ले लेना है. For example, he bitterly criticized existing works for many of their shortcomings. किस तरह की shortcomings? That many of them are treating history simply as a collection of facts and figures. उसके पीछे explanations नहीं offer कर रहे हैं. Many of the works of history have been criticized by him because they are not pure works of history. Rather, they are also literary and religious works. तो जो उसका literary value है वो dilute हो जाता है. ठीक है. Secondly, जो individuals के decisions हैं, they should also be critically interpreted. For example, if he talks about the activities or the actions of Queen Didda, who he criticizes bitterly because she violated many of the tenets of dharma. For example, she killed 3 of her own sons to come onto the throne. she had an affair with one of her courtiers, who she made a very powerful minister. She also diverted the line of succession from her paternal line towards her maternal line. तो ये सब के लिए वो criticize करता है उसको. But he also justifies this by saying that this was necessary because of the prevailing conditions. Kashmir had been going through a period of almost a century of misrule and chaos, and a revolution was necessary to bring about peace and prosperity. ठीक है, तो इस तरह से ये क्रिटिकल इंटरप्रिटेशन ऑफ इंडिविजुअल डिसीजंस को भी लेके आता है. क्रिटिकल अप्रोच टू कम टू कंक्लूजंस. तो वंस अगेन इन द केस ऑफ क्वीन दिद्दा ऑफ कश्मीर. ठीक है, तो इट वाज अ critical work. It should be a pure work of history. He has criticized previous historians for not writing pure histories. He has not included any mythological or religious teachings in his books. He has tried to keep away from cosmological explanations for historical developments that have taken place. तो उसने ये नहीं बोला है कि इस राजा ने इस रीजन को इस वजह से कॉन्कर किया क्योंकि स्टार्स की ये दशा थी और इस ये वाला यज्ञ परफॉर्म किया था. ये सब उसने नहीं लिखा है. राइट. सो इट शुड बी अनबायस्ड एंड इम्पार्शियल. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, कल्हना although he was associated to different rulers, for example King Harsha of Kashmir, who was the ruler just before Jayasimha, and also King Jayasimha, he knew them personally, but he did not receive royal patronage from them. Okay. He did not receive any royal patronage. So, do you think that his work is going to unnecessarily eulogize the kings? नहीं करेगा. Unbiased outlook होगा इसका. He also criticized previous scholars for doing the same. ठीक है, for eulogizing their patrons. Is this much clear? At the same time, while criticizing the previous scholars, he has also accounted for their biases while interpreting them. In the prologue, this is what Kalhana says, in fact, that a good work of history should be such that it should be able to transport the reader into the past. The reader should become like an eyewitness to the occurrences, developments of the past. This is the quality of a good work of history. It should have a broad scope. Now, although, as the name of the book suggests, Rajatarangini का मतलब it is a book of kings. ठीक है, so although the focus of the Rajatarangini was court life, it was intensely interested in the impact of royal policies and actions on the lives of the common people. In fact, Rajatarangini clearly defines the ethical parameters of kingship. क्या टर्म यूज किया है? प्रजम लाभम. What does it mean? Public welfare. While judging various kings and queens of history, what is the chief parameter to judge them? This public welfare. जिन किंग्स की एक्टिविटीज की वजह से पब्लिक वेलफेयर इंप्रूव हुआ है वो किंग्स अच्छे, जिनकी वजह से खराब हुआ है वो किंग्स खराब. ठीक है. So while his attention was not directly on the lives of the common people, it was always a major field of interest for Kalhana. And whether it was comparative or not, था या नहीं था, तो Kalhana displays a great awareness of his place in history, not only Kashmiri history but also Indian history as a whole, Indian and Asian history as a whole. He was familiar with the regions and rulers of North India, right from Punjab to Bengal. Not only the contemporary rulers of his period but also previous rulers. For example, he talks at length about rulers such as Harshvardhan, Kanishk and Ashok. He was also familiar with existing religious, cultural and linguistic traditions in the region surrounding Kashmir, not only within India but also in Tibet and Central and West Asia. He was also familiar with the impact of external influences on Kashmiri culture. He identifies both Shaivism as well as Vaishnavism to be implants from the northern plains. ठीक है. Shaivism और Buddhism नेटिव नहीं थे, बाहर से आए थे. He was aware of this, for example. जो existing traditions हैं, they have talked about them. Existing Buddhist texts have talked about them. Their own court chronicles, the local Raj Kathas, सबने इनके बारे में mention किया हुआ है. So, Kalhana was familiar with them. He also consulted with these books, so that is why he knew about them and he wrote about them. For example, he considers Ashok to be the founder of the modern city of Srinagar. ठीक है, so that is one vital piece of information that we get. Ashok is considered by Kalhana to be the founder of the modern city of Srinagar. He also talks about how Ashok, during the reign of Kanishk, Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism came to the region of Kashmir. So Buddhist images and temples started to be constructed from the period of Kanishk onwards. So this is another thing that he talks about. इस तरह से बात, हाँ, बिकॉज ही वॉज एबल टू आइडेंटिफाई द बायस ना, तो केवल आपको आइडेंटिफाई करना होता है कि यार ये तो बायस चीज है, देन यू आर अवेयर, बिकॉज इफ यू आर अवेयर ऑफ द बायस देन यू कैन वर्क अराउंड दैट, यू कैन सी थ्रू दैट बायस गेट्स नेगेटेड इन दैट, ठीक है. तो ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ दिस, would it be correct to call the Rajatarangini a true work of history? Yes, but it suffers from some limitations also. क्या limitations? किस तरह के limitations? देखो 8 किताबें लिखी है ना इसने, जो अर्लियर किताबें हैं, the first 3 books, they contain a number of chronological inconsistencies and gaps. For example, जो पहला वाला डायनेस्टी था, you remember that Gondana dynasty. Kalhana mentions that 52 kings of that dynasty ruled over Kashmir in its earliest historical phase. But out of those 52 kings, he mentions only 17. ठीक है, तो कई सारे gaps मिलते हैं. Further, during this early period, because of the paucity of sources, it appears that Kalhana has also relied upon some religious work, क्योंकि mythological interpretation of history भी यहाँ पे दिया गया है, right? और क्या limitation? Any other limitation? Region specific तो नहीं, because he was writing the history of Kashmir only, so we cannot fault him to writing about the region that he said that he was to write about. ठीक है, he knew that he was writing the history of Kashmir. कश्मीर के बारे में लिख रहा है तो क्रिटिसिज्म नहीं है. अब यूनिवर्सल हिस्ट्री तो लिख नहीं सकता था, राइट? कोई और शॉर्टकमिंग? Is something reflected in his, for example, criticism of Queen Didda? क्या रिफ्लेक्ट होता है? He criticizes her for what reason? For violating the golden mean of Prajam Labham, or for violating dharma? Violating dharma. Now, promotion and preservation of dharma किस क्लास का प्रायोरिटी होता है? Not kings, Brahmins, right? So some Brahmanical bias is also reflected in his writings. ठीक है? In fact, this Brahmanical bias is not reflected only in his assessment of Queen Didda, but also in the institution or the evolving institution of kingship. in the normative sense, जो Brahminical ideology है, that is a supporter of which kind of kingship? Strong kingship or weak kings? Strong kings. क्यों? क्योंकि strong kings are going to be strong allies for the Brahmins, right? तो जब king का position weak हो जाएगा, तो how are the Brahminical scholars going to interpret it as a positive development or a negative development? Negative development. So for those episodes of Kashmiri history where the king's authority was minimized and feudal elements were prevalent, उन periods को as a period of crisis portray किया है कल्हना, ठीक है? तो that is also a reflection of his Brahminical bias. His Brahminical bias is further reflected in his choice of medium and the sources that he consulted. Primarily किस तरह के sources consult किए इसने? किस language के sources? संस्कृत sources. और इसने एक अपनी किताब किस language में लिखी? Also in Sanskrit. Now Sanskrit scholarship में ये Brahminical bias inherently present है, right? And thus it is not surprising that the same bias was also inherited by Kalhana. ठीक है? This is another shortcoming. कोई और shortcoming? Yes, while Kalhana does show some interest in the conditions of the common people, he did not make a scientific study of the conditions of the common people. Even during the contemporary periods, he was focused more upon the court intrigues that were going on and how they were influencing the lives of the common people. So according to Kalhana, the common people are and always have been a mute spectator to historical development, never making any active contribution to the development of history, development of historical change. ठीक है? तो court-centric approach to understand historical change is another limitation. लिख लें इसको जल्दी से. तो पहले एक छोटा सा इंट्रोडक्शन लिखो. The Rajatarangini of Kalhana, the Rajatarangini of Kalhana is considered to be the first and only work of true history of ancient India. Full stop. अगला point. Consisting of 8 books known as Tarangas. Consisting of 8 books known as Tarangas, comma. It covers the history of Kashmir from the mythological times up to the 22nd regnal year up to the 22nd regnal year. 22nd regnal year of the Kashmiri king Jaisimha. Within brackets you can write 1148. Next point. The Rajatarangini contains a historical account of the different kings belonging to various dynasties, comma, their struggles, successes, failures, and fates. Full stop. Next point. These dynasties include वन टू थ्री करके गोंडाना, आदित्य, गोंडाना टू, कारकोटा, उत्पल, UTPAL, उत्पल, यसाकारा, एंड लोहार. कितने हुए? 7 डायनेस्टी. कौन कौन से? गोंडाना 1, आदित्य, गोंडाना 2, कारकोटा, उत्पल, यशकारा एंड लोहार. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. There is remarkable consensus among colonial, nationalist, as well as Marxist historians regarding Rajatarangini's status as a true work of history. Subheading दो एक. Assessment of Kalhana's Rajatarangini. Write down. Kalhana himself has provided us useful insights into his assessment of history writing and its purpose. Subpoint. Kalhana emphasizes that a good history has the power to transport the reader into the past and explore it like an eyewitness. And explore it like an eyewitness. Next subpoint. With this, the reader would be able to learn valuable lessons from the past. Next main point. Kalhana further says that a good historian is like a judge who honestly and impartially studies the past without being affected by his personal likes and dislikes. Full stop. Subpoint. In this, comma, Kalhana enjoyed a major advantage. Being the son of a royal courtier, name of his father was Champaka. Okay? He was the son of a royal courtier. Being the son of a royal courtier, comma, he had access to both first-hand accounts of the court as well as valuable literary texts kept in the royal library. ठीक है? So he was getting first hand information regarding whatever was happening at the court, and he was also learning about past developments through his studies in the royal library. सब पॉइंट लिखो इसके अंदर. At the same time, comma, Kalhana himself never received any patronage from the king. Full stop. Therefore, his writing was critical, objective, fair, and unbiased. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट इसी में लिखो. कल्हना, नहीं सेम सब पॉइंट का सब पॉइंट नहीं, नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट. कल्हना also criticized earlier historians for unnecessarily eulogizing their royal patrons. He complained that earlier works often missed important details, and even contained misleading and wrong information. Information. ठीक है? Often. क्लियर? तो दो चीजें हमने देख ली हैं. क्या क्या? एक तो अनबायस्ड होना चाहिए और दूसरा हाँ मेन like a judge. एक तो a good work of history should be able to transport the reader from the present to the past, and secondly a good historian should be unbiased like a judge. Next main point लिखो. Kalhana emphasizes that a simple narration of events is not the correct way of writing history. He says that it is like a chronicle with no validity. chronicle with no validity. Full stop. Subpoint. Rather, a good history is analytical in nature. Is analytical in is analytical in nature, comma, establishing causal linkages between events and analyzing the motivation behind every important action. Behind every important action. ठीक है? Next main point. Kalhana displayed a strikingly advanced technical expertise to research his work. Subpoint. He relied upon the works of as many as 11 earlier scholars, comma, a large number of inscriptions, comma, royal eulogies, राजकथा जो होती है, royal eulogies, comma, ancient monuments and coins, Next subpoint. Therefore, Kalhana's work is a truly empirical history. Next subpoint. Moreover, Kalhana does not simply take the writings of previous scholars on face value. Rather, he openly criticizes them for several weaknesses. Next main point. The Rajatarangini is unique in the body of Indian literature. In the body of Indian literature. For its uniquely secular nature. For its uniquely secular nature. Subpoint. While other great Indian literary works necessarily have a heavy dose of religion, Kalhana has consciously skirted away from the religious theme. To focus purely on a fact-based analysis of the past. Subpoint. This makes the Rajatarangini a pure historical work. Subpoint. In fact, Kalhana has even criticized earlier historians such as Shemendra, He wrote the Ripavali. For diluting his history with unnecessary myths, rhetorics, and eulogies. ठीक है? Next point लिखो, next main point. Another unique feature of the Rajatarangini is its public consciousness. Manifested in the ideal of Prajam Labham, within brackets you can write public welfare. Kalhana remained deeply interested in the impact of royal policies on the lives of the common people. On the lives of the common people. Impact of royal policies on the lives of the common people. ठीक है? Next main point. Kalhana also displays a striking awareness of parallel traditions, histories, peoples, and cultures. Parallel traditions, histories, peoples, and cultures. Full stop. Subpoint. For example, he talks about both the contemporary and previous rulers of North India, from Bengal to Punjab, comma, subpoint. He was also familiar with the languages, customs, and religions of North India, Central Asia, and Tibet. Next subpoint. He understood the impact of external influences on Kashmiri history, including the growth of Shaivism and Buddhism. Next subpoint. He was also aware of earlier trade links between Kashmir and Central Asia. ठीक है? हाँ. Next subpoint. Most importantly, Kalhana was able to identify the common linkages between these parallel cultures as well as their differences. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो। Differences in language, differences in customs, religion, differences in economic practices, differences in diet, cuisine, fashion, right? सब में. Next main point. Kalhana appreciated history as an interdisciplinary study. As an interdisciplinary study. Subpoint. He mentions that in the early period, comma, the Kashmiri culture and language was indistinct from that of the plains. From that of the plains. Subpoint. It was only after the construction of dams, embankments, levees, and terraces that association with the plains, embankments, levees, and terraces, dams, embankments, levees, and terraces, that association with the plains reduced. Why was this? डैम, एम्बैंकमेंट, लेवी और टेरेस बना करके लोकल लोग किस चीज के लिए प्रिपेयर कर रहे थे? लोकल किंग्स किस चीज के लिए प्रिपेयर कर रहे थे? एग्रीकल्चर के लिए प्रिपेयर कर रहे थे. तो द रीजन बिकेम एग्रीकल्चरली सेल्फ सफिशिएंट. ठीक है, क्या लिखा है? विद द प्लेन्स रिड्यूस्ड रिजल्टिंग इन the regionalization of polity and culture. The regionalization of polity and culture. ठीक है, this was happening from the early Christian centuries onwards. All right, so this is one very good way in which we can show that how geography is interrelated with economy, is interrelated with population, is interrelated with culture, is interrelated with polity and history as a whole. ठीक है, so he was aware of this. So these are the unique features of Kalhana's Rajatarangini which qualify it as a true work of history. Next subheading लिखो, limitations. Write down. While the Rajatarangini is widely considered to be India's earliest true historical work, to be India's earliest true historical work, comma, it suffered from the following shortcomings. देखो एक एक करके. The early chronology of the Rajatarangini has several inconsistencies and gaps. Has several inconsistencies and gaps. The point, in the absence of contemporary chronicles, comma, Kalhana was forced to rely upon mythological works, mythological and religious works, mythological and religious works. And religious works. ठीक है, this is one shortcoming. Next, write down. The Rajatarangini also suffers from an inherent and strong Brahmanical bias. From an inherent and strong Brahmanical bias. Subpoint. Kalhana was probably an unwitting an un sorry an yeah an unwitting victim, an unwitting victim of this bias. Next subpoint. This is reflected in his criticism of the perceived violations of dharma, of the perceived violations of dharma by previous kings and queens. Which he bitterly criticizes. Especially in the case of Queen Didda. Next subpoint. The Brahmanical bias also seeps through Kalhana's analysis of the evolving nature of Kashmiri kingship. Of the evolving nature of Kashmiri kingship. Full stop. Example: the declining power of kings is often presented as a crisis. Is often presented as a crisis. Next subpoint. Further, Kalhana's reliance upon Sanskrit sources to research Kashmiri history further imparted a distinct Brahmanical bias. A distinct Brahmanical bias. Next main point. While Kalhana was interested in discussing the impact of historical change on the common people, there was little or no attempt to study history from the perspective of the masses. From the perspective of the masses. Full stop. Subpoint. The Commonwealth or the common people were largely considered to be mute spectators. Mute spectators. Mute spectators who did not play any role in shaping historical change, but were rather always at the receiving end, of history, but were rather always at the receiving end of history. ठीक है, ये हो गए इसका क्रिटिसिज्म. कंक्लूजन. क्या बोल सकते हैं हम कंक्लूजन में? That despite these limitations, the Rajatarangini remains an extremely significant work of history. ठीक है, write down. Despite these limitations, comma, the historical significance of the Rajatarangini cannot be overstated. Cannot be overstated. Full stop. Cannot be overstated. There is no debate that it was a unique piece of literature in the context of Indian history. Full stop. The wide-ranging consensus among modern historians regarding its historical pedigree, pedigree को काट दो, its historical validity is a testament to its significance. Next point. However, herein lies a problem. क्या प्रॉब्लम हुआ है? पिछले 150 साल से रिगार्डिंग द राजतरंगिनी सारे हिस्टोरियंस ने एक ही ओपिनियन एलिसिट किया है, दैट इट इज अ ट्रू वर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री. So the opinion that it is a true work of history has not had any critical study for the past 150 years, and that is itself antithetical to the very discipline of history. Therefore, over the previous 2 decades, इसको अब दोबारा से क्वेश्चन को उठाया जा रहा है, whether it is a true work of history or not. ठीक है, तो write down. The Rajatarangini has elicited roughly the same response from all sections of historians for almost 150 years. Subpoint. And what is the characteristic of this response? All of them are praiseworthy in nature. क्या praise कर रहे हैं? इसके critical approach को, empiricism को, the sagacity and unbiased attitude of Kalhana, इन सारी चीजों को, its non-judgmental character, right? So write down. All of them have heavily praised its empiricism, scientific approach, rational attitude, unbiased character, and non-judgmental analysis, and non-judgmental analysis. Next sub point. As a result, there has been little to know new research regarding the significance of the Rajatarangini as a source of history. तो प्लेस ऑफ राजतरंगिनी इन इंडियन हिस्ट्री उसको ऑलमोस्ट फिक्स कर दिया गया है, उसको एज अ वैलिड सोर्स ऑफ हिस्ट्री मानते हैं ऑलमोस्ट सारे हिस्टोरियंस. देयर हैज बीन नो सिग्निफिकेंट क्वेश्चनिंग ऑफ दिस आइडिया. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट. This itself is antithetical. This itself is antithetical to the. This itself is antithetical to the very precepts of history writing. To the very precepts of history writing put forward by Kalhana himself. Put forward by Kalhana himself. Subpoint. As a result, comma, over the past 2 decades, comma, some sections of historians have started analyzing the Rajatarangini in closer detail. Full stop. Next sub point. This has brought forward a partial reinterpretation. तो पहले के हिस्टोरियंस क्या मानते थे? What kind of a work is the Rajatarangini? A judgmental work or a non-judgmental work? Does Kalhana apply his own sense of righteousness to events of the past as viewed by him, या फिर completely unbiased attitude लेके चलता है? Completely unbiased attitude, right? That is what they praised about Kalhana also, because this is what he writes in the prologue of the Rajatarangini, that a historian should be like a judge. But recent interpretation क्या emerge हो रहा है? That the Rajatarangini is deeply judgmental. Kalhana applies his own moral compass to various things that were done or were not done by previous rulers. ठीक है? And that is why to characterize it as non-judgmental would be inaccurate. Right? Write down. For example, comma, the idea that The Rajatarangini is a non-judgmental and dispassionate work of a sage-like scholar, has been brought under review, of a sage-like scholar, comma, has been brought under review. Full stop. Subpoint. Recent writings argue that the Rajatarangini was deeply judgmental, and Kalhana freely and harshly judged the activities of past rulers in accordance with his own moral compass and idea of righteousness, ठीक है? So that is one new interpretation. कोई और नया interpretation? बताइए. अरे कल्हाना ने केवल अपने प्रोलॉग में अगर लिख दिया है that I have consulted various coins, various inscriptions, तो क्या हमें वो सच मान लेना चाहिए? नहीं मान सकते हैं. He may have done this for a portion of his book, but to do that for the entirety of his work, was it physically possible for a single individual within his own lifetime to do this? नहीं था. Right? Write down. Further, next main point. Further, the empiricism of the Rajatarangini, has also been questioned. Subpoint. While some of the epigraphic sources mentioned by Kalhana have been discovered, comma, others have not. Some of the epigraphic sources mentioned by Kalhana have been discovered, comma, others have not. तो दो चीजें हो सकती हैं इसमें. एक तो कि वो डिस्ट्रॉय कर दिए गए हो बाद में, या फिर दे हैव बीन लॉस्ट टू अस, और दूसरा कि वो कभी एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करते थे. राइट? तो राइट डाउन. देयर इज अ पॉसिबिलिटी that many such sources never existed. ठीक है, तो ये कुछ फर्दर क्रिटिसिजम्स इसके अगेंस्ट लाइन अप किए गए, बट व्हाट कैन नॉट बी डिनाइड इज his remarkably modern understanding of history writing. What is a true work of history? वो जो standards इसने अप्लाई किए थे, those are universally accepted by all modern historians, चाहे वो colonial historians हो चाहे अभी तक के historians हो, as a necessary components of a true work of history. ठीक है, तो there may be some problems, some shortcomings with his approach, with the empiricism, with his research work, with his methodology, बट अप्रोच को कोई भी क्रिटिसाइज नहीं कर सकता है, राइट? तो राइट डाउन, एट द सेम टाइम, एट द सेम टाइम, comma, it cannot be denied that Kalhana possessed a peerless sense of history, a peerless sense of history within inverted commas. Subpoint, in fact, the same parameters applied by him to define the paradigm of history writing, are still in use today, full stop, subpoint. In this, comma, the achievement of Kalhana remains unmatched. Subpoint. His achievement is further amplified by the fact that while such standards also appeared in Greek, Chinese and Persian traditions, Kalhana did it seemingly single-handedly. बाकी जगहों पे क्या देखने के लिए मिलता है? That these standards emerged over a long period of time with the contribution of a long chain of scholars. तो वहां पे traditions of history writing exist करते थे. इंडिया में क्या हुआ? Kalhana was the father and the sole exponent of the tradition of Indian history writing in the modern sense. So he did it in almost a vacuum, right? That he was able to anticipate all of these things. बाकी जगहों पे जो चीजें हो रही थी, he may not have been aware of those traditions of history writing, right? And that is why his achievement is unique. Clear? Now take down a question. Throw light on the historical significance of Kalhana's Rajatarangini, was it truly the first Indian work of true history? Was it truly the first Indian work of true history? Word limit is 200, 15 marks का. बताइए हो जाएगा? तो हिस्टोरिकल सिग्निफिकेंस जब डिस्कस कर रहे होंगे तो किसके बारे में बात करेंगे हम? Sense of history, the material qualities of Kalhana's work which distinguish it from the existing literary tradition in India, right? And herein lies the historical significance. Was it truly the first Indian work of true history? था या नहीं था? Yes, there is historical consensus regarding this because ये जो मटेरियल क्वालिटीज हमने यहाँ पे मेंशन करी हैं वो सारी की सारी राजतरंगिणी में एग्जिस्ट करती थी. हाउएवर कुछ अब देयर इज नाउ सम रीइंटरप्रिटेशन. And this consensus has been questioned. fully नहीं क्वेश्चन किया गया है, पार्शली क्वेश्चन किया गया है. किस बेसिस पे क्वेश्चन किया गया है बताओ? क्या क्वेश्चन किया गया है? अरे तो चैलेंज नहीं किया गया, दैट इज इटसेल्फ एंटीथेटिकल टू द वेरी प्रीसेप्ट्स ऑफ हिस्ट्री राइटिंग दैट कलहना प्रिस्क्राइब्ड. अब उसको रीइंटरप्रेट किस बेसिस पे किया गया है? कुछ नए लिमिटेशंस क्रिटिसिज्म्स मेंशन किए गए हैं क्या? बताओ. अभी लिखवाए हैं, 2 पॉइंट लिखवाए हैं आपको अभी जस्ट इसके पहले. नहीं. अरे भाई हाँ. एक तो देयर हैज बीन अ क्वेश्चन ऑन एम्पिरिसिज्म. क्या? और दूसरा उसके बाद अरे नहीं, मैं पूछ रहा हूँ कि रीइंटरप्रिटेशन अगर किया गया तो क्या नए क्रिटिसिज्म्स, व्हाट वर द न्यू काइंड्स ऑफ शॉर्टकमिंग्स जिसके ऊपर फोकस किया गया? फिर पियरलेस सेंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री एक क्रिटिसिज्म थोड़ी ना, ये तो प्रेज है. Yes, that it was not unbiased, not non-judgmental, it was deeply judgmental. अब आप मॉडर्न हिस्ट्री की या फिर नई किताबें पढ़ते हैं तो वहां पे आपको हिस्टोरियंस जजमेंटल दिखते हैं? नहीं, एकेडमिक तरह के दिखाई पड़ते हैं, साउंड करते हैं, राइट? तो although they may be harboring some biases, they may have some judgments regarding this, they try very hard not to let these judgments seep into their history writing, their vocabulary. यहाँ पे ऐसा नहीं है, ये बहुत bitterly criticize करता है those things which he considers to be bad on the part of previous rulers, right? दूसरा, empiricism पे क्वेश्चन उठाया गया है that it was not physically possible for Kalhana to have studied the various sources that he refers to, and secondly that कई सारे inscriptions, monuments हमको नहीं मिले हैं, probably they were figments of his imagination and never existed. लेकिन इसके बाद आप conclude क्या करोगे? that although यहाँ पे ये जो material aspects of his history writing है, यहाँ पे हो सकता है थोड़ा बहुत criticism कर सकते हो आप किस चीज को criticize नहीं कर सकते हो? his sense of history, right? The parameters for history writing that he set for himself वो अभी भी apply होते हैं, and his achievement is magnified in the backdrop of the fact that बाकी civilizations में तो ये जो parameters हैं they evolved through a process of evolution, they emerged through a process of evolution. In India, he appears to have done this almost single-handedly, and that is why the Rajatarangini, it cannot be denied that it is India's first work on true history. Okay? That is the note that we are going to conclude upon. हो जाए. देखो यहाँ पे स्ट्रक्चर क्या होगा आपका? पहले आपको you have to talk about the historical significance. इसमें किसकी बात करोगे आप? sense of history and the material qualities of the Rajatarangini which set it apart from the other works of Indian history or other sources of Indian history. ठीक है? जो इसके यूनिक कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स हैं, जो हमने 8-9 कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स के मेंशन किए थे, वो यहाँ पे आपको मेंशन करने होंगे. Then we need to address whether it was the first true work of Indian history or not. तो यहाँ पे आपने इसके जस्ट पहले इनके बारे में बात करी है, एंड ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ दिस यू कैन आर्ग्यू दैट अभी तक पिछले 150 साल में जितने हिस्टोरियंस हैं, ऑल ऑफ देम unequivocally agree that yes, it is a true work of Indian history और it is unique. तो ये पहला भी है, ठीक है? However, इसके बाद आपको इसे क्वेश्चन करना है that recently over the previous 2 decades or so अब कुछ नए क्वेश्चंस इमर्ज हो रहे हैं. किस तरह के क्वेश्चंस? that firstly कल्हना का जो हिस्ट्री राइटिंग का स्टाइल था, that was not non-judgmental, it was deeply judgmental. ठीक है? For example, he uses even scatological terms while talking about some of the misdeeds of previous rulers, right? तो scatological terms मतलब excrement के फॉर्म में उसको लिटरेरी टूल्स यूज करके कंपेयर करता है, राइट? तो ऐसा हमको इंडियन संस्कृत लिटरेचर में क्या कहीं भी किसी लिटरेचर में ये सब देखने के लिए नहीं मिलता है. He was deeply bitter in his criticism. That is one thing. Secondly, empiricism के ऊपर क्वेश्चन उठाया गया है, राइट? हाँ, तो हम बात कर रहे थे उसके स्ट्रक्चर के बारे में। पहला वाला पोर्शन तो ठीक है ना, कि हिस्टोरिकल सिग्निफिकेंस हम बात करेंगे उसके बाय टॉकिंग अबाउट द सेंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री एंड द मटेरियल क्वालिटीज। इन द सेकंड पोर्शन व्हाइल वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट वेदर इट वाज द फर्स्ट ट्रू वर्क ऑफ हिस्ट्री और नॉट, तो अभी तक कंसेंसस क्या था, that it was the first true work of history and there was no challenge to this idea, but recently over the past few decades कुछ challenges emerge हो रहे हैं, there has been a reinterpretation, firstly on the basis of the style of language that he uses, the deeply bitter criticism of the misdeeds, perceived misdeeds of the past, in which Kalhana appears to be deeply judgmental, that is not in keeping with the tradition of history writing, unbiased history writing, right, where the author is supposed to keep his emotions out of the text, वो नहीं देखने के लिए मिलता है। दूसरा, एम्पेरिसिज्म पे कुछ क्वेश्चंस उठाए गए हैं, बट even after these shortcomings there is one thing which nobody can argue against us, at least till now, and that is Kalhana's peerless sense of history writing, right, कि वो जो उसने अपने लिए पैरामीटर्स सेट किए उस समय 12th सेंचुरी, मिड 12th सेंचुरी में, वो अभी तक 21st सेंचुरी में मॉडर्न हिस्टोरियंस भी उन्हीं स्टैंडर्ड्स को फॉलो करते हैं। And his achievement is magnified in the backdrop of the fact that while जो previous authors थे, जो बाकी civilizations के authors थे, for example Greek authors हो गए, या फिर Chinese हो गए, Romans हो गए, Arabs हो गए, Persians हो गए, they also developed almost the same set of standards, but their discipline was the result of an evolutionary process. Kalhana had did this almost in a vacuum. तो एक बार में खुद से ही उसने ये सारी चीजें करी, he did it almost single handed. So that is why it is considered to be a true work of history, right? तो अभी तक consensus भी यही है, although some attempts have been made to challenge the validity of the Rajatarangini as a true work of history, लेकिन कोई अभी तक बहुत मेजर चैलेंज नहीं आ पाया है। फर्दर रिसर्च भी नीडेड फॉर दैट, ठीक है। so that is the structure that we are going to write. Now anything else? Sudeep, Mehboob, I hope this topic is clear. Who are the new historians? अच्छा, जिन्होंने चैलेंज किया है, तो ये कई सारे नए हिस्टोरियंस हैं, not belonging to a particular field. Some Marxist historians themselves have challenged it. कुछ revisionist historians आए हैं, तो I'll be able to supply you the names एक बार मैं जब दोबारा जाकर के पढ़ूंगा, right? मैंने एक आर्टिकल पढ़ा हुआ था, उसके बेसिस में आपको बता रहा था कि ये हुआ है। I don't currently remember the names, कल बता देता हूँ, ठीक है। तो आई एम एंडिंग द क्लास फॉर टुडे। हमारे एक आध टॉपिक्स और बचते हैं, दैट इज इंडियाज कॉन्टैक्ट विद साउथ ईस्ट एशिया और स्टडी ऑफ साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी इन एंशिएंट इंडिया, राइट। रामायण महाभारत ये तो हमने उसमें कवर किया था ना। अरे इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन नहीं कवर किया था? आई डोंट थिंक कि उससे ज्यादा जरूरत है, क्योंकि क्वेश्चन आने नहीं वाला है। अगर आता भी है तो ये आएगा कि इम्पैक्ट क्या रहा है, दैट इज मोर जीएस वाला स्टडी rather than ऑप्शन वाला स्टडी, ठीक है। तो ये दोनों टॉपिक्स रहते हैं, इसके अलावा और कुछ रहता है दिमाग में आ रहा है, ध्यान में आ रहा है? ठीक है, तो व्हाट आई वाज थिंकिंग ना, कि इन दोनों के लिए मैं आपको नोट दे देता हूँ, क्योंकि क्लास में करवाने का कोई बहुत ज़्यादा फायदा नहीं है, फैक्चुअल इन्फॉर्मेशन ज़्यादा है यहाँ पर। एंड कल से हम मेडिवल शुरू करते हैं, मेडिवल प्रॉपर। अर्ली मेडिवल तो हम कर चुके हैं, मेडिवल प्रॉपर कल से फिर शुरू करते हैं, ठीक है। चलिए देन, shall I end this session guys?